On this edition of Title Unboxed, I'm excited to welcome a former fighter, current trainer, all-time boxing fan, and foremost, a good friend, Travis Hartman.
Welcome to Title Unboxed. With more than 40 years of experience in the fight game, our host, Doug Ward, will be covering every corner of the ring as we get comfortable between the ropes. We'll talk with both the lesser knowns and the legends, discuss boxing's rich history and current state of the game. We'll also look at today's latest innovations, equipment breakdowns, and insights you won't uncover anywhere else. Join us now as we take a look inside Title Unboxed.
Travis, it's good to finally see you here on Title Unboxed.
It's good to be here, man. We've been talking about this for so long, so I'm glad to finally be on here and be chatting boxing with you, of all people.
Yeah, so that's what we do.
I love boxing, and I know you do too.
I'm a lifelong fan.
Same.
You know, boxing's a rough, tough sport. There's a handful of people that I've known as long as you, and that's probably about it. I could probably count them on one hand.
Yeah. I was just thinking about it, and I met you when I was fighting in the Silver Gloves, so I had to be at least 10 years old, and I'm 40 now.
Oh, geez.
30 years, Doug, that we've known each other. And that's, I was kind of doing those numbers and I was like, oh my gosh, like, I think I'm kind of getting older now too.
I don't have to tell my age, do I?
It's okay.
I was 12 when we met.
I like it. We were same age.
Yeah, so yeah, we were Silver Gloves. We actually, I think the first time we met was they wanted a local angle at the National Silver Gloves, and for whatever reason, you fit the bill, and you're on KCTV5, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah, we did like a live segment. It was like one of my first live segments as a 10 or 11-year-old.
You handled it like a pro.
You know what? I went on to win it that year too, so that was a pretty good omen.
Oh, did you? Was that your first year in it?
I think that was my second year. I think I was 11 because the first year I took second, and maybe that's why they probably wanted me, because the second year I ended up winning it, and then I won it again. I won it back to back.
Yeah, it was the perfect story for them because they did the initial one, and then the follow up was about you winning.
Yeah, it was a fun time.
Well, like you say, you've been in the sport for 30 plus years, so I want to kind of give everybody, our viewers, our listeners that aren't familiar with you, a little bit of background. You've been in the sport for 30 plus years. You turned pro in 2004, right?
Yep. March of 2004.
Yeah, and you fought some of the biggest names in the business. I mean, 2009 alone, you fought Jesse Vargas, who was undefeated at the time, Keith Thurman, who was undefeated at the time, and our boy Terence Crawford, who was undefeated at the time.
Yep. I fought a murderer's row.
So you bring a lot of credentials to talk to the topic of our discussion, which is about the current crop of welterweights and some of the great ones of the past.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I lost all those fights. Those guys remained undefeated, but I did share the ring with them.
Yeah. Well, and you learn a lot about the sport when you're fighting guys at that level.
Yeah, and being from the Midwest, from Missouri, I was from Missouri, a little small town there. It was honestly, I knew what I was doing. I was just kind of taking it for those opportunities because once I turned pro, it was harder to get fights in the amateurs. I fought in nationals all over the country, and I was winning and advancing and all that stuff. So it was easy essentially to get fights as the amateurs. And I was amateur 14 years as well, and then 46 pro fights. But taking fights with those guys, like I wanted to press myself. And if you know the boxing game, the pro boxing game, a lot of guys have inflated records. They're getting to like 15 and 20 and 0, and they're not very good. And I remember seeing that when I turned pro, and I remember telling my dad, I was just like, hey, I don't want to do that. I don't regret it, but I should have built my career a little better. I was 5-0, and I fought Chavez Jr., who was 17-0. So, and I'd only been pro a year. So like that was a little dumb, but I didn't want to be one of those padded records. It was 20-0, and I could have been 20-0 fighting guys that a lot of other guys build their records on, but I was just like, you know what? Why? I'm going to go for it. And I think I more than went for it. But it was an experience, and I don't regret it. It got me to where I am today. And, I loved it all, every bit of it, even the losses. You got to enjoy the journey, not necessarily the result. And that's kind of what I did. I fell in love with the journey.
Well, like you say, a guy from the Midwest, unless you have those connections, you're always going to be the B-side, unless you have some internal contact with that big manager, that big promoter, you're always going to be called in at the last minute, unprepared, whatever.
And then and unfortunately, when people look at my pro box, like I was 156-13 as an amateur. When people look at my pro record, it's upside down, right? But what
Yeah.
they don't realize is that that pro game was more of a business. I mean, I fought Keith Thurman on 5 days notice. I fought Terence Crawford on 5 days notice. I fought all those top guys on, short notice fights. So, and it's not like that it's not that I chose not to train. I just wasn't training at the time. And they called me.
Yeah.
Then I'm like, oh, boom, I'll go train. It wasn't like I was lazy. It's just I know I was going to college. I was doing things like that. Boxing wasn't my full-time job, and that was made it tougher. But I got by still because I did have a big amateur career. So I got by with those guys, okay, because I was a very talented fighter. But I wish I could have, had more time for sure to fight those guys. But you know what? It got me to where I'm at today. I learned the business side of boxing from that. And I got to share the ring, like I said, I think Terence Crawford's going to go down as one of the greats. So I got to share the ring with that guy. And I went the distance with him somehow.
Yeah. There you go. That's worth some recognition right there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's start that. Let's start right there. Let's start with Terence Crawford. I want to talk about the top welterweights of the game, your opinions on them, what matchups you think are out there, how you feel about Terence Crawford and his legacy. So let's start there. Ring Magazine has, I think, Terence Crawford, Errol Spence Jr., of course, who Crawford just wiped the floor with.
Yeah.
Cody Crawley, Jerome Ennis, a couple guys I've never seen much of.
Yeah.
In David Evanilson and so Giovanni, what's his name, Santillan, which I've not seen much of him. But
yeah, I haven't either. And there's only one guy that I really know a little bit about, and that's Jerron Ennis. He's a pretty talented guy for sure. Boots Ennis, they call him. But for Crawford, man, I fought all those guys, Jesse Vargas, Keith Thurman, Terence Crawford, even Chavez Jr. was a world champion at one time. So I fought all of those guys. But every time after I fought all of those guys, I told everybody, I was like, Terence Crawford is going to be one of the best. And people were like, at the time when I fought Crawford, nobody heard about him. But I was like, I've shared the ring in the amateurs with some of the best. Nonito Donaire, who at one time was a pound for pound champion in pro, I beat him in the amateurs at the Silver Gloves, actually.
Yeah.
So I was like, I've been in the ring with some really good people. I can spot talent when I see it. Unfortunately, I got a firsthand look at Terence Crawford when he was hitting me. But I told everybody that would listen, I was like, you guys, I'm telling you, there is something special about this kid. They're like, we've never heard of him, Travis. He's from Nebraska. And I'm like,
right.
I don't care. He's good.
But that's part of it, isn't it? I think he got written off because he's a Midwest guy, and that's kind of kind of carry that stigma that comes along with it.
Yeah, and that's where I kind of fell into that mix too, where I just fell into that stigma of, oh, I'm just a Midwesterner, and that was my downturn, I guess, from the game, because I kind of believed the skeptics. But all props to Terence Crawford, because he didn't believe the skeptics. The guy kept believing in himself, and finally he earned his recognition, and that's why he's where he's at right now. And even though he just moved up to welterweight a couple of years ago, I do still think he is a full-fledged welterweight, and I think his biggest win was at welterweight. So that's why I consider him a welterweight, because his biggest win was Errol Spence. And that's another one where I called that one too, because I don't know what it was, but there was something about Errol Spence that I never was fully impressed with.
Yeah.
And I don't say that like I could beat him. I'm not saying that because I don't want the haters to come out and be like, oh, well, you would. It's not like that. There was something that he didn't have that it factor. He was by far good, obviously. I mean, he beat guys like Kell Brook and even Sean Porter. He beat guys like that pretty good. So he's obviously great. But I was just like, I don't see him beating a guy like Crawford. And I didn't think it would go that way, though. I mean, Crawford annihilated him.
Yeah.
And by all means...
What is it about Crawford that sets him up that he's at that next level than all these other guys we're talking about, at least in my opinion, and probably yours too?
Yeah, so I think, and this is what I said for the Errol Spence fight too. I thought Terence Crawford, he has that, he's so athletic. He switches from righty to lefty, and he does that so well. But he's a big puncher, but he's not one of those like one punch devastating knockout artists. But what he does is his pinpoint placement with his punches, he's like a laser beam. He's like a sniper. They put that red dot on you, and he lands it right where he throws that red dot. And that's Crawford. And that's why he knocks people out. He does have power, but it's a different kind of power. Yeah. And the guy's so athletic. I mean, he goes to the body, he goes to the head so well. His movement's so good, turning righty to lefty. I mean, the guy's got power in both hands because he can turn right to left. And there's not very many fighters that can do that. I mean, one of the other really great welterweights was Floyd Mayweather. But did you ever see Floyd Mayweather turn lefty? He couldn't do it. Not all fighters can do that. And that's why when Terence Crawford does it, you can't even tell whether he's right-handed or left-handed. I can turn righty to lefty as well, but I don't look as fluid as Terence Crawford
Yeah.
does. I mean, he looks like he's a natural lefty when he does it, but he's not. He's a right-hander. So I think that's what separates him, is just that he's very smart. His ring IQ is very good. He breaks down fighters similar to what Floyd Mayweather does. He'll break fighters down and he learns and he, takes in data as the rounds go on. And then he uses that data to get him out of there. I mean, that's when you can finish guys at that level, and Terence Crawford finishes guys, that's impressive.
Yeah. And he has that junkyard dog quality about him where you back him into a corner, you better watch out because his claws are gonna come out and you're in trouble, He's just got that hunger.
Exactly right. I mean, that's a good word for it. I mean, he does. It's like almost a shark in water. He smells blood. He's going to get it. He's going to finish you. And I always tell people when I do fight predictions, I'm just like, you don't see knockouts very often in the very high level fights. The super high level fights when those guys are fighting each other, unless it's the heavyweight division. But other than that, usually those fight like Canelo fights. Canelo, when he fights really top guys like Triple G, those fights go the distance because they're both elite and they can knock each other out, but they're just really good and they don't ever get knocked out. But Terence Crawford finds a way to knock out literally almost everybody except 9 people has he knocked out. And I'm one of those that he didn't, but he finds a way to knock people out and it's insane.
Yeah. So in your opinion, what's out there for him? Because I don't see anybody in the welterweight division that's really going to test him. What do you think? He's talked about moving up and fighting Canelo Alvarez, which, I'm not sure that's the best approach. You can only gain so much weight and put on so much size. Although Alvarez is probably a little bit on the downturn now. What do you see for Terence as a future? I don't want to make this all about Terence Crawford, but he is the welterweight division.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I love talking about it because I think he's earned that right for us to talk about him like this. But for Terence Crawford, so I had him on my podcast weighing in with Travis Hartman, and I kind of asked him too. It was a similar question. I was like, hey, how do you ride off into the sunset? What is your last fights look like? Because he's getting up there. I think he's 35, 36 now. Nowadays fighters are going longer, but still he's getting up there to the middle range where he has to start thinking about what's the end game. And he wanted to win another undisputed title in a different division. So 154, he wanted to win all of those titles because he won them all at 140. He moved up to 47. He won all 4 titles. He wanted to do it again because it would be unprecedented to go up to 54 and do it again. Yeah. I think he can at 154 though. So
well, there you got Tim Tszyu, who's you got a decent fighter. I don't know that he's could beat Terence Crawford.
Yeah.
Jamel Charlo, Brian Mendoza.
Who
just some of the guys right there.
Yeah, it's Zeus fighting this weekend. Actually, he's fighting Sebastian Fundora, a guy who's 6'5", mind you. That's who Tim Tszyu fighting. And I'm with you. I'm with you on the Tim Tszyu. I've seen a couple fights of his, and I mean he's a world champion. He got the title because they stripped somebody out. I think Charlo, and they gave it to Tszyu. So he didn't really earn that title. But I don't know. I don't think he comes close to beating Terence Crawford. Yeah, no chance.
I don't.
He's not there yet. Or I don't know if he can ever get there either, but it's kind of still a cool story, Doug, because think about this. Most sons of former greats, it's usually hard to live up to that. Most of them never even come close. So the fact that Tim Tszyu already a world champion, that's pretty good because Costa Tszyu, his dad, was probably a Hall of Famer, right? It's pretty good that he's to this point, but I don't see that in him, that it factor. He doesn't have it either, but he's undefeated. He's confident, so I think that would be a great fight for Terence Crawford to win another world title at 154. I think it's perfect if Terence Crawford should face the winner of Sebastian Fundora, Tim Tszyu this weekend. And then obviously everybody calls out Canelo because that's the money fight, right? That's the money fight. Like it's legacy too, yes and no, but Terence Crawford wants to fight him because that's a fight where Terence Crawford can ride off into the sunset because he's going to make $30 million probably or something even, somewhere close to that. I think that the clamorings for Jaron Boots Ennis are probably correct too. I think that maybe next year after Crawford's fought like a Tim Tszyu or some kind of a legacy type winning another title, I could see him fighting Jaron Boots Ennis. And I think Boots Ennis is pretty good. He's got talent. He's got skill. Why not test it with the champ who's Terence Crawford? Yeah. So Yeah, I think that's probably up there. I think it's cool that we're talking about the pound for pound rankings. Terence Crawford has been in the top 10 pound for pound rankings since May of 2015.
Yeah, crazy, right?
And we talk about how nobody really talked about him, but he crept in there and he stayed there and he just kept climbing, and now he's renowned as the number one pound for pound.
Yeah, yeah. I agree. The Tszyu fight's probably the best one out there for him, just based on name.
Yeah. And he's got a world title, and I think that's there. I mean, Charlo is there too, for sure. I just don't think Charlo probably wants that either, because I think Crawford beats him too.
Yeah. So Crawford's inactivity. Let's talk about that for a
Yeah.
second. What, the ins and outs of that. I know Bob Arum came out and said, well, he doesn't promote himself enough, and coming from the promoter, but he comes off a fight against Errol Spence Jr., destroys him. Everybody finally shines the spotlight on him that he deserves, and then he quietly disappears again.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that? You have any insights or opinions about that?
Yeah, I mean, that's how I learned the business of boxing the hard way as well. And I think that Terence Crawford, it's the business side of the boxing that is kind of throwing him under the bus. I mean, think about it. One, this guy's not a blockbuster pay-per-view seller, right? Terence Crawford's not,
Right.
but he's really good. So why does anybody want to take that risk and fight him? They're not going to make a ton of money and they're probably going to lose. So I think a lot of people won't fight him because of that very factor. But I think now he is starting to become a little bit more of a draw, obviously, with that demolishing of Errol Spence. I think he's going to be a draw now, but I think before, his inactivity was because of that. And while Bob Arum is for sure a part of why boxing has been great, because he's been around since the 60s. He promoted Muhammad Ali at one time. So we have to give him some credit for helping boxing along the way. But I also think Bob Arum has been a big roadblock for a lot of great fighters. And if you look at it, all the fighters who left Bob Arum went on to be great, meaning he wouldn't let them essentially be great because he kind of shackled them a little bit. They all left him. Oscar De La Hoya left him. Muhammad Ali left him. Terence Crawford left him. Floyd Mayweather left him. And they all, when they left Top Rank and Bob Arum, they went straight up. So that's where I don't understand Bob in that regard, because obviously Bob's got a nose for talent because he's had all these guys. He signed those guys. So he knows what he's doing, but for whatever reason, they didn't explode until they left Bob Arum. Yeah. It's got to tell you something about what he's doing as a promoter. So maybe it's not all on Terence Crawford, because everybody talks about, Terence Crawford doesn't know how to promote himself, blah, blah, blah. He's a fighter.
Yeah.
So promote. He has a promoter. He's got a manager. I mean, take care of the guy. The guy obviously can fight. So, it is what it is, but I think he is getting out there more. I do think that he's out there a lot more now because of the Errol Spence fight. But if you think about it, every great fighter needed that one big fight to kind of separate them. Like Oscar De La Hoya, when he gave Floyd Mayweather that opportunity, as soon as Mayweather beat De La Hoya, he went through the roof as well. Yeah. So every fighter kind of needs that dance partner to get him to that next level. And Floyd Mayweather got that when he fought Oscar De La Hoya. So, and Terence Crawford, I think, got that when he fought Errol Spence. But now, why is he not fighting? Yeah. Well, on the podcast, we talked about it as well. It was Errol Spence had a rematch clause. And Errol Spence, it was up to him to initiate that rematch clause. And he did, right? He had a month to do it and he initiated it. But then he put Crawford on hold for 6, 7, 8 months. Finally, was like, oh, hey, I'm not going to fight now. And then I'm pretty sure I just read that Errol Spence just got rid of Derek James. And I think he is moving up to 154 now. So that's kind of breaking news. But it's just unfortunate because I don't think it's Terence Crawford's fault, his inactivity. Yeah. And it's not his fault, but it does look bad on him.
Yeah. What do you do? Yeah. Well, even if he's not fan friendly in terms of a casual fan, if you're a boxing purist and you really know the sport, I mean, he definitely separates himself from the crowd.
Yeah, but I think, more so than Mayweather, I think Crawford is a fan favorite because he knocks people out. He finishes people, and the average fan, they love to see that. But he does it more methodically, obviously, Crawford does. But I think I think people do like to see when he fights, but he hasn't had that dance partner. He's only had a few of those dance partners that can bring that out in him. And we all need that. Think about it. Without Arturo Gatti and Mickey Ward, Mickey Ward would never even been talked about probably, but those 3 trilogy fights with Arturo Gatti, now the guy's a fan favorite, right? But he's not. Mickey Ward, in all fairness, and Arturo Gatti, they weren't A-level fighters, if you want to be honest, but
Well,
they were fan favorites because their dance partners, that their styles made for fantastic fights.
yeah,
And that's, you just
and
gotta,
none of those fights were for a world title, which is
isn't
funny
that
when you think
crazy?
about it. Yeah. So when you go back, you talk about that. Sugar Ray Leonard had those dance partners. He had
Yep.
the Duran, the Hagler, the Hearns. Sugar Ray Robinson had those dance partners. He had the Jake LaMotta, the Bobo Olsen, those guys that, were elite fighters that put them at the top of their game, maybe tested them a little bit and allowed them the opportunity to separate themselves from the crowd. Of the all-time fighters, who do you think, who would you put up there ranking as the top welterweights of all time?
Man, so I've been thinking about this for a while. It's a tough one because for me, there's obviously a lot of the olden guys. I mean, talking 60s and before that were just phenomenal, obviously, but I didn't really get to see those guys. And it's just tough for me nowadays because I think athletes are different, right? I think we have sports medicine and the way we look at sports and athletics and things like that have changed night and day.
Yeah.
And I was looking up some of these past welterweights, and some of these past welterweights were like 5'5", 5'6", And now we have guys like, granted, Mayweather was 5'8", so he's not huge, but still 5'5" is pretty small. I don't know if they would be able to contend with these guys these days, but I think without a doubt, you got to put Sugar Ray Leonard up there. I mean, that's a no brainer. If you don't put Sugar Ray Leonard up there, then you're just a hater, like for sure. Like he deserves to be up there. He earned that right. I mean, he was a welterweight, but obviously when he moved up and fought Hagler and all those guys, he moved up to middleweight and fought those guys. Yeah. And he beat some of those guys. So that's wow, I think he's a great welterweight. I mean, you got to throw Felix Trinidad in that mix too, of my era. You got Oscar De La Hoya too. I think he's there. And this is pretty much from the 90s to now. For me, that's kind of when I started watching boxing, was in the mid 90s. So, the Roy Jones Jr., well, even though he's not a welterweight, that was like the era that I kind of grew up with. So that's kind of the welterweights that I'm kind of pulling from a little bit. Obviously, Sugar Ray Leonard, like I said, you have to put him there. Like the guy is without a doubt a great Hall of Famer, all of that. Trinidad, I think, deserves to be up there too. This guy had stone hands, man. And really the fights that he lost is when he moved up in weight and fought like Bernard Hopkins and those guys at middleweight.
Yeah.
A welterweight, Felix Trinidad, pretty phenomenal character right there, like for sure. But I'm kind of curious though, Doug, who's your top couple of welterweights other than Sugar Ray Leonard? Because I'm pretty sure you have him up there too.
Yeah. It's my head says Sugar Ray Robinson because he was just all around a proficient technician. He could punch. He had power. He had speed. He had that ring IQ, which really separates those kind of guys.
Yep.
But my heart says Sugar Ray Leonard. I mean, of course. I'm like you. I grew up on him.
Yep.
I started boxing because I saw him in the '76 Olympics. So I followed his entire career, and I think he was a little bit underrated. Just simply based on a lot of people out of the block said, well, he's a media darling. He's not the real thing. But he had killer instinct that was just off the charts. I mean, if he barely had you hurt, you're gone. He knew how to finish the show.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the difference, I think, between good and great is guys like that. Look, we just talked about Crawford has that instinct to where he feels, he smells the blood, he finishes them. I think you're right. I think Leonard had the same thing. And Leonard was fast, hit hard, and he was flashy. It's funny to hear you say he was underrated, though, because I feel like most people be like, he was overrated because they always talked about it. If you asked Marvin Hagler, he'd be like, he was overrated. Obviously, we can't ask him that because he passed away. But I've never heard him being underrated though. That was a curious thing. But I see what you mean though, because you're right. At the same time as they were kind of overrating him, they were also looking past him, meaning that they thought that his skill wasn't where it should be, but it was. Like the guy was great.
Well, I think that at the time they thought the media created a lot of it with the story about his wife and his child, and Cosell grabbed a hold of him because Ali was moving out of the picture and they needed that next guy, and that was Ray Leonard. So I think some people felt like he was a media creation.
Yeah. I mean, it is very possible for sure. What about, so who else you got? Yeah, you got Sugar Leonard, Sugar Ray Robinson, which I think are phenomenal picks, and I would agree with those.
I think you have to put Henry Armstrong in the mix. just based on the sheer number of fights. He was an aggressive fighter. He won titles in multiple divisions. You know, he was just, again, he was an all around good fighter. He was tough. He was
Yeah.
durable. You couldn't knock him out. I even heard at one point, I don't know if this is true, but I'd heard that they did an autopsy on him after his passing, and his skull was a 1/4 inch thicker than an average skull.
What?
I don't know. I don't know if that's true, but I had heard that story at one point. So that's why he was just he could take such a solid shot.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So I mean, the olden days. So like, I did some research as well going into this a little bit, and there's a couple other names that were thrown out there, like Joe Walcott, Kid Gavillion, um, guys like that. And so,
Yeah,
and that why I said that is I didn't get to watch them. Obviously, I had to watch old films of those guys to even put them up there. And I think you have to put them up there, but also I think those guys, like I said, were a little bit undersized too. But I
yeah,
just think this is how I know I'm getting older though, is I think those guys were tougher than the guys now. And I
yeah,
don't know if that's a fair statement to say because I think Terence Crawford is tough, yes. But I just think these guys came from a different era to where the most talented guy didn't always win. It was the toughest guy that won. And I think those guys, the Sugar Ray Robinsons and those guys, Henry Armstrong, I think they separated themselves from the rest because they were so tough and could take a
yeah.
beating, but also deliver a beating.
I agree, and I've asked that question of people before. You know, because the fighters of the past, are we romanticizing them and putting them in a category that they don't really deserve to be in, saying that some of them could contend with today's fighters? But I think, and you kind of alluded to it already. I think the skill sets are a little bit more, athleticism is a little bit more advanced. But
Yep.
those guys were tougher because they had to, you know, if you look back, you know, today you have everything's automatic for you. Doors open automatically. Dishes get done automatically. Your clothes get washed automatically. Whether you're doing those menial tasks, it applies to everything, you know.
Yep.
And all that stuff makes you a little softer, I think, because you don't have you know, the daily grind to contend with as much as those fighters back then did. Plus, they fought nonstop. I mean, part of their training was fighting.
Yeah.
You know, they'd fight once every month. Well, you know, you're not out at the gym, so that does make you, I think, inherently a little tougher when you're
Yeah.
in the gym all the time.
Yeah, I mean, looks at all those guys that we just mentioned all had like over 100 pro fights.
Yeah,
And nowadays, once you start creeping up to 30 or 40, they're like, whoa, that's a lot of rounds, you know?
yeah,
So not very many guys even have 40 to 50 pro fights now because that's a lot of rounds. But back in the day, I mean, they had 100 to 150. I think Sugar Ray Robinson had what, like 200 and something?
yeah, yeah,
He had 100 and some win, like 170 wins or something. So like, I think you're right. And I don't, it's the product of their surroundings and the time. And that's why it's always hard for me to compare eras to like now. And that's in
yeah,
any sport for me. Any sport, I feel like that. It's like, it's just tough because fighters now look at the heavyweight division, for example, even they're super athletes now. You got
yeah,
Tyson Fury, who's 6'9", 276. Mike Tyson was 5'10", 212.
yeah,
I mean, that's a big difference. You got Anthony Joshua, you know, 6'6", 252. Those guys, it's just tough because Tyson was small, but he could punch clearly. So he could still handle himself. But
yeah,
that big enough height difference and weight difference, it's just tough to compare those nowadays. But
yeah,
I think though, unequivocally, I think those Sugar Ray Leonard, Sugar Ray Robinson, those are hard guys not to put up there. You would have to find some kind of good reason to not have them up there. And
yeah.
if you didn't have them up there, I would probably question your boxing knowledge.
Right, right. Well, and you brought up in regards to Terence Crawford, but I think it applies to any of those elite athletes that you would put in that GOAT category, is they were adaptable. You know, you look at a Sugar Ray Leonard when he fought Hearns, they back and forth changed their boxing styles through the course of the fight. You
Yep.
know, he started out the boxer, he became the puncher, he turned back into the boxer, you know, back and forth. And Terence Crawford has that ability to change, to adapt to the situation minute by minute, round per round.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's one of the other greats, I think. Now we have to consider him a great, I think, is Floyd Mayweather. Is he did the same thing. That was probably the greatness that he had too, was what you just said. That's
Yeah,
something that I don't think people understand. Crawford has it too, is they're able to literally change their style in the middle of a fight.
yeah,
I don't think people realize how hard that is because boxing is a lot of muscle memory. You do a lot of drills to repeatedly do what you do naturally, and you keep
yeah,
doing that. Those guys were able to 2 or 3 rounds in. They're like, oh, this isn't working. I need to do this. And that, I think, is what's special about fighters like Floyd Mayweather, Terence Crawford, Sugar Ray Leonard. Those guys you're right. They were able to adapt, and that made them amazing fighters because of that.
Yeah, because almost every fighter goes into a fight with a game plan, but is that ingrained in you and you can't change it up? You stick to that game plan and you lose? You see that happen with some guys where they just can't get out of that one gear, that one approach. But, again, the elite fighters, the great fighters we're talking about, we're able to change that up.
Yeah, and that's the difference, man. It's just tough because I know a lot of really good fighters that just didn't. I think Errol Spence is one of those guys who he knows how to do something very good, but other than that, he doesn't know how to change. He is Errol Spence is who he is, and that's not a bad thing because he's very good, clearly.
Right.
But he can't change, and he didn't know how to adapt to a style like Terence Crawford, and you saw what the ending with that was, and he got demolished.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. Yeah. Well, Travis, it's always fun talking boxing with you, breaking down the welterweight division. We'll have to huddle back up again and talk about some other topics. But again, always love talking to you. You have your own insightful and good perspective in your podcast. So if you don't mind, before we wrap up, for the viewers and listeners, share where they can follow you and listen to what you've got to say about upcoming fights and the boxing game and the industry as it goes along.
I appreciate that, Doug. Yeah, it's Weighing In with Travis Hartman, which is my name, Travis Hartman. We're on YouTube. We're on Spotify. Literally, you just Google our name, Weighing In with Travis Hartman. We're literally everywhere. iHeartRadio. We're on Instagram. We're all those places. So I definitely appreciate you letting me plug the podcast because we definitely need it. It's a grind. Podcasts nowadays, everybody has them. So it's kind of hard to separate yourself from that mix, but we're grinding. And I love talking boxing, Doug, especially with people like you that know boxing. You're a true boxing historian. You're a true boxing guy. You've been on the inside, you've been on the outside. And it makes my eyes light up when I get to talk boxing with somebody that actually knows boxing as well.
Yeah. Well, same on my end. Anyway,
So I appreciate you having me.
Good seeing you, and all the best to your family. I know you got babies coming on the way.
Twin boys on the way. We're going from 1 kid to 3 kids.
Oh my gosh.
Like
well,
that.
Good luck with that.
I appreciate it.
Well, I hope you can keep up the podcast during that. That's gonna be a difficult time.
Yeah, definitely will.
Well, all the best, Travis. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, Doug.
Thank you again.
Thank you for watching this episode of Title Unboxed. If you're anything like me, you can never get too much boxing. So if you'd like to watch more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and on our Title Boxing YouTube page.